So last week, I asked you to read an article called "The Very Racist History of Gun Control" and to think about the rhetorical situation that that article was responding to. So this video is just meant to recap some of the excellent discussion that took place over the discussion board. I want to just begin by pointing out that if you didn't have an opportunity to do a little bit of looking into the author Jeff Jacoby, you would have found that he is somebody who is identified as a conservative syndicated journalist. What that means, syndicated journalist, just means that he has a weekly column in a national newspaper. But that he's conservative is important, right? That's where his political worldview comes from. That becomes important because he's actually speaking to an audience who typically disagrees with him. His audience is a liberal readership, definitely a readership who believes in advocating for racial equality. So liberal Americans in general, perhaps liberal Black Americans specifically or in particular. We take a little look at the occasion or the context. The article is written 2021, right? And then if we take a look at the image, right, the dark-skinned figure holding a semi-automatic weapon, we take a look at that, we see that this image came from a protest in 2020. Now, this is not just a protest for gun rights, right? We know that 2020 was the high water mark of the Black Lives Matter movement, right? It was the absolute explosion of protest activity that took place that summer. And so the author is very much invoking all of that context. And essentially he's doing that because he wants to say to his audience, if you are passionate about racial equality, then you have to also be passionate about gun rights or gun ownership. Now, what's interesting here is that these typically are issues that don't go hand in hand. Broad strokes here, a little bit of an oversimplification, but typically a liberal audience or somebody from a liberal political worldview tends to believe in greater restrictions on gun ownership, right? That we need more legislation to control who has access to these weapons. A liberal audience or a liberal worldview is also going to be a group of people who typically believe in policies that help us get closer to racial equality. And so what the author is doing, again, is he's saying, if you care about this one issue, then you have to care about the other. And he's demonstrating that these, in his opinion, these two things go hand in hand. So that's the broader context, as well as the purpose. And it's of course wrapped up into an understanding of audience. The more immediate context or occasion is that the author is responding to this tweet that came from the American Civil Liberties Union, which is a progressive organization that files lawsuits to try to help push for progressive policy changes. So he's citing this tweet, which is talking about the origins of the Second Amendment. The tweet essentially makes the argument that the origins of the Second Amendment are racist. And the author is acknowledging that, and he's saying, not only are they racist, actually what's really racist is that we have this legacy of not allowing folks of color to have access to these weapons, and that to really, advocate for racial equality, everybody needs to have access. One of the things that he does throughout the rest of the article is that he really relies heavily on ethos. If we look at, he cites a number of historical figures. He talks about Ida B. Wells. He talks about Malcolm X. He talks about Martin Luther King. He talks about Frederick Douglass, right? These are all important Black historical figures, abolitionists, right? Civil rights organizers. And he's relying on their reputation, and he's either using their words or he's using anecdotes connected to them to make the argument that Black people must have access to guns and must be advocates for gun rights. And by extension, all people who believe in racial equality, so liberals and progressives, etc. What he's doing is he's saying, Martin Luther King is very, very well respected in this community or in this milieu or this grouping. Frederick Douglass is somebody who's very well respected in this milieu or this intellectual grouping. Ida B. Wells, right, etc. So if they believe in gun rights, or if they had this experience where their lives were somehow harmed by not being able to have access to guns, right, then the credibility of their stories helps to carry through his argument. So again, as we continue to think about the choices that authors make, The ways that they frame their arguments are always in reaction to something that's happening in the world, as well as in acknowledgement to whom they're